Good morning. Nothing like making somebody get a bunch of developers to stand up and move around and get closer to their friendly developers next to them, right? Did y'all make some new friends? Cool. So I don't know about y'all, but I have a lot of vices. I really do, and I like to share them with people. Maybe it's TMI. One of my biggest vices is coffee. I go to bed at night thinking about that cup of coffee that's going to come to me in the morning. And I think about how I can code with that coffee, because that's my other vice. I love to write code. So it might be something that you guys like to do too. And when I drink that cup of coffee, it's the best cup of coffee ever. And I love it. And it might be something like this, my relationship with my coffee, more important than my laptop. But when that cup of coffee is gone, how do you feel? You're just waiting for that next cup of coffee to be out there. This is kind of like our experience with the open web. We love what's there today. We don't know what's coming tomorrow, but as soon as the thing that's gone for today, we start looking towards tomorrow. So how do we know what things to be looking for? How do we know what to embrace? So I want to share a couple of things ways I look at things, 5 different tips on how I deal with the open web and what it kind of looks like for me in 2018. First, browser-compatible languages. Many of you may remember the days when we used to try to figure out how to write JavaScript that would work across Netscape. Some of you may not know what that word means anymore. Different kinds of browsers are out there, even IE. Does everybody know IE's gone effectively? It's now called Edge. Okay. Much better. Trying to make different languages work across browsers was a big problem for a long time. Then something called jQuery came out, which was amazing to help solve this problem. But these problems don't go away. We still have a problem. So what happened with JavaScript a couple of years ago is it was taking 7 years or so for new versions to come out. Well, the web moves faster, right? Things that take 7 years in technology don't stick around. So the committee decided to go ahead and create versions of JavaScript every year. So to support these different browsers, we can look up what version of JavaScript works in each browser on sites like caniuse.com. But sometimes it can be a roll of the dice. And maybe we want to look at how do we support the version of JavaScript we need in our browsers. Is it ES5, 2015, or many of you may know that 2017 came out a couple of months ago as well. We can now do things like async await inside the browsers, and we can check these out. But what do we do about the next features coming and the next features? How do we make sure we keep up with things without letting our apps get old? This is where we can use things that allow us to target the browsers that we need without worrying about the details. TypeScript and Babel are 2 open source projects that really make this super possible. And picking either one of those, it's whatever kind of works for you. I happen to use both of them for different kinds of projects. They're really great because they allow you to write the code using the latest leading edge features. And you can compile down to any version that you need. You can even go back to ES3 if you really wanted to. So why is this such an important thing? Because there's low risk and high reward. How many times has somebody told you you could start using a technology, and if you didn't like it in a week or 2 or a month or 2, you could completely get off that technology within seconds? It's really almost unheard of. With TypeScript and Babel, you can literally just say, you know what, I'm tired of these things. Let me compile back to ES5 and call it a day, and I'll throw out the TypeScript. I've got the JavaScript, because at the end of the day, it's just JavaScript. So I'm looking forward to using the new features of the web as they keep coming out on a yearly basis by keeping up with these 2 tools. The second thing I want to talk about is code editors. I've worked at a lot of large corporations, and one of the questions I get asked a lot is, how do we standardize on a single code editor? And that usually doesn't come from a developer. That usually comes from somebody who's like, you know, we want to buy one tool. We're tired of having 50 of them. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's not an important decision to make. The better decision to make is, how do we support all the code editors that our developers want to use? In the open source world, we have great selections. We've got VS Code. We've got Atom. We have StackBlitz, awesome newer one on the market, totally online based. And we still have Vim for those who like to type a lot. Emacs too. So VS Code, pretty cool. It looks a lot like Atom. They're very similar in a lot of ways. This is my favorite editor. I like to use this. There's tons of open source extensions for it. I hope you give it a try. There's also one called StackBlitz, which came out about a month or 2 ago. It's completely online based, and you can create React or Angular or plain old JavaScript apps right in the browser. It's really powerful. Give it a try. That's the power of open source. You can bring your own editor. This was a B, but that was last night when I was busy drinking. But so bring your own editor, not B. Third thing is JavaScript frameworks. I hear this all the time. Since I'm into Angular and I used to be in Knockout and Backbone, I've done a little React and Vue. People are like, John, who's winning? Winning what? There is no winning with the frameworks. If a framework is winning, that means we only have one. If we only have one, we don't have creativity, we don't have motivation, we don't have competition, we don't have a lot of the great things the open web gives us. What we do have right now is decisions to make. And picking the one that you want out of the leaders of the pack is the way to go. And if you don't like what it's doing, contribute back to it. So who are those leaders today? The things like the Angulars of the world, or the Reacts, or Vue, who's the new kid on the block, who's quite amazing as well. All three of these are great options, all open source, great communities and rich ecosystems. And guess what? The right thing here is we're all going to benefit from this diverse ecosystem. By having all of these, they're all helping each other become better. I work with the Google team quite a bit with the Angular project. They actually work with the folks at React. They look at their code. They share ideas. I work for Microsoft. I just came back from a conversation between the TypeScript team and the Google Angular team. These teams talk to each other. If you said this 5 years ago, you'd be like, wait a minute, Microsoft, Google, and Facebook are talking to each other? What's going on? It's the open web. So once we have our choice, we've got moving forward, something's changing in the web. The ecosystems are getting richer and richer and richer. There's more and more code out there. I worked on a project 2 years ago, and that project was a massively large external-facing website that generated in the hundreds of millions, if not almost billions of dollars. This project needed to load within a second and a half. Everything over that was going to cost money. With these kinds of projects, when you're early on in the development, you might see that it's not loading in a second and a half when you start coding, right? We started off, we had a 21 meg file, basically, being loaded into the browser with JavaScript, CSS, images, so on and so forth. That's not going to be acceptable moving forward, right? When we were done with that project, we got it down within a second and a half. But how do we get there? A lot of the optimization techniques are really important on the web. We need speed, because if we don't have speed and don't drive amazing experiences, people won't use the software. So it's got to be small. We've got to figure out how we get that code to be small in our applications. We also want it to be fast, not necessarily exactly the same. We want to parse it fast. We're going to make sure we're doing as much on the server as we can before it gets to that browser. We want to do background processes where possible. Let things load that the user needs to interact with, but do things in the background to get things ready for their next interaction. And then also make sure it's just in time. If you can predictively interpret where users are going to go, you can make your application much more interactive and a much better experience. So how do we do this? Things like Angular and React have tools to do things like lazy loading and code splitting right out of the box. They use tools like Webpack to do this. So what you can do with lazy loading is say, look, I'm going to go and load the dashboard of my application up, but in the background, I'm going to say, don't go get the next section of code until the user actually clicks a certain button to go there, or I can prefetch it if I know they're eventually going to get there anyway. Thus, the user doesn't know that that code wasn't loaded on load, and they didn't have to wait for it. In the end, that time to first interactivity is key. And some of the tools we can do to do this, like in Angular, we would type ng build, and we can spit out some stats here. One of the ways we optimize code is figure out what's in our code. We build it small using tooling, and then we can spit out our stats and use tools like the Webpack Bundle Analyzer. Fantastic tool. There's a couple of them out there that do this. It'll look at the stats of the code inside your application. Why is that valuable, though? Have you ever written code and then later on you deleted some code and you thought it was all gone, but some of it still lingers, right? You've got these ghost artifacts in your code that you didn't realize still stuck around. So with a tool like this, you can actually look at the insides of your code and say, okay, this is how big each of my sections of code are. This is what's inside of them. And what I look for in these kind of graphs, if you see a bunch of tiny little rectangles anywhere in these graphs when you look at your code, that's usually a good sign that you're probably pulling in more code than you're using. A great example of this is with Angular, I use a library called RxJS. And I use a bunch of operators in there. I use anywhere from 10 to 15 in any normal application. Well, I've worked with people who are like, you know what, I don't really want to import 10 to 15 different statements in my code. I'm just going to import all of RxJS. How big could it possibly be? I'm already using 15 operators. Maybe there's 20, right? No, there's over 100 of them. So by pulling in just that one line of code, the app still works. It's less code to write. We look at it in a chart like this and we see, oh my gosh, I've just pulled in 3 meg of code or something like that, unzipped. So we use tools like this to identify problem spots, hot spots in our code. And we can also do things like tree shaking. Tree shaking is probably the best visualization I've seen in coding lately. Imagine you're taking your code, and your code is a tree. Inside that tree is a bunch of apples. When you shake that tree, the apples that fall out are the ones that probably weren't so good anyway, the ones you're not using. Tree shaking is the process of taking your code, shaking it, and getting rid of anything that's not being used, getting rid of dead code. This is something that used to be only the smartest people in the world could do 2 years ago. Now it's something that's built into a lot of tooling, and it's going to become an expectation in 2018. By using the optimization, the bundling techniques, server-side rendering, by using tree shaking and dead code removal, we're going to shrink down our apps and make them much faster. And this is going to create great experiences, but it doesn't stop there. Great experiences are really what this is all about. We don't write code just for the sake of seeing the code. We write it for the users who use our applications. If that experience is awesome, they will continue to use it. One way we can make these experiences awesome is to think about what else can we do besides optimizing code with tooling. Well, there's a new technology called progressive web applications. And progressive web applications allow us to determine how do we make the time till the app is first usable shorter. Maybe the site really does take 3 seconds to load, but can we get it so that first interactivity is ready within a couple hundred milliseconds? If we can do that and it's visually ready for the users to use and interactive, that's a big win. So there's a concept that the Polymer project coined. It's up on the Chrome project. I love this. It's called Purple. At least I call it Purple. There's no vowels here. And what Purple stands for is a concept that kind of helps you think about how to make your experiences better. Rendering and getting interactivity as soon as you can. You want to make sure you get something up and running for the user as soon as possible. Makes sense, right? Push the critical resources of the browser right on load. As soon as we get loaded in the application, make sure everything they need to run the app is there. Anything that's like they might do, or it's Yagni, you ain't going to need it, push that off. Pre-cache everything else with a service worker. Service worker can work in the background for us to go get the rest of the code while the user's interacting. And then lazily load the rest of the app as the user navigates through the site. If we do this, sites that could take 3 seconds to load are now up and running in hundreds of milliseconds, so people can use the app, and in the background we load the rest. This is going to make it easier and faster and a much better experience, and it can even run offline. So this is all made possible through PWAs, Progressive Web Apps. You can learn more about that from this link here. There's some great articles up on the Chrome websites. This is really all about reducing that time to first interactivity. If we do that, people will use it more and we'll get much lower bounce rates. And all these concepts are coming out of the open source communities. There's tools you can do and use to create PWAs, like Workbox. It's a wonderful tool in the open source, constantly evolving. Get up there and you can help contribute to that like I am. It's a fantastic, fantastic tool to help make it easier to use PWAs. React and Angular are both contributing to their projects with their command line interfaces to make it easier to use too. And the last piece of open source next year is something that's really dear to me, and that's having empathy in open source. We have a tendency in the open source world to use GitHub issues, Twitter, social media, and everything else to interact with each other. And we can't see everybody. We may all be on the same GitHub repos, but I can't see you when you're there. You can't see me. One of the things that's really important is to get involved. Think about when you've encountered an open source project and you've had a problem. When you've had a problem, did you go to the GitHub issues and report it? Did you try to create a reproduction of it? Did you try to create a pull request? Did you engage with the owners and authors of that repo? Most of the time, those authors will want to engage back with you. And think about what this person's doing. Most of the time, these authors are doing it on their own spare time at night while drinking their favorite Vice coffee so they can stay up. Having empathy to make sure that we all understand, how would I feel if somebody else came to my project and said, this thing isn't working? Well, maybe if they followed it up with, here's what I expected to happen, here's what happened, here's some code, will this help you with this problem? Can I pitch in? When we work together, we create much better things. Thinking about who's on the other end of that is a big piece of being in the open source community. And it's the thing I love the most about not being in a closed environment, because we have the power in this room, in this world, on this internet, to help make open source better and create the future. So with all this, these are the different things that we can look forward to in 2018. I'd like to leave you with this thought. When you're writing your next bit of code, when you're deploying your next Docker image to the cloud, think about that we build technology for humans, not for the sake of building technology. There's always a human at the other side of this. I want to thank you very much and hope you have a great rest of the conference.